Islam and terrorism is a topic we'll discuss on today's program with Muslim Steve Johnson. We'll also present a piano soloist and learn about a new educational quiz game. Why is terrorism associated with Islamic religion? What can be done to make terrorism less attractive? These and other questions will be answered for us by Dr. Steve Johnson, director of the Dawah Islamic Training Center at Plainfield, Indiana. Dr. Johnson, why is the Islamic religion associated with terrorism more than any other religion? Or is that an accurate perception?
I don't think it's an accurate perception, but it's a common perception in the United States today. And I think for some good reasons. First, I think there are a good number of Muslims who, I think maybe for historical reasons, have become frustrated with their state. They feel that they are sort of politically and economically disinherited and have their backs to the wall and acting out of frustration, as former President Carter said, that they're acting out of frustration and sometimes overstep the bounds of their Islamic teachings. So that while Islam would condemn terrorism, there are Muslims, I think, who are acting out of that frustration who do resort to those kinds of acts.
Is this in reference to the Israeli question?
I think that would be the primary problem, would be the displaced Palestinians.
What can be done to make terrorism less attractive?
Of course, that's a very, very difficult question, and I do agree with Bill Moyers has been asking that question, I think, recently, and again, former President Carter, and I think they really have hit the nail on the head in saying that we have to get at the root cause of the problem. I disagree with Phil Baum, who is the Associate Executive Director of the American Jewish Congress, who says that we need to look at terrorism as simply an abominable act in and of itself and condemn it, regardless of what causes it and regardless of the consequences of it. I think as long as we do that, then we're going to condemn ourselves to see repetitions of the act because we're not going to get at the root cause of it. So I think that if we can get at that, which would be the rights of the Palestinians to their homeland, that will help that. But I think we also have to be realistic, that there are religious leaders who call themselves Muslims, who are not following the precepts of Islam, who are capitalizing upon this upsurge of Islamic revivalism and are using it to further their own gains. For example, I think Gaddafi would be a good example. The vast majority of the Islamic world would condemn Gaddafi and would say what he's teaching has nothing to do with Islam. And in fact, he's tried to wed socialism with Islamic rhetoric, and Islam and socialism are mutually exclusive. Islam has its own economic system that cannot be wedded to Marxism or socialism. And so by doing that, he's really stepped outside the fold of Islam. Or the Ayatollah Khomeini, who similarly has overstepped the boundaries of Islam by taking hostages and things of that nature that Islam cannot agree with.
Speaking of Khomeini, do you feel there'll be a lessening in the incidence of terrorism with the death of the Ayatollah?
I don't know, and I think it will depend on which group it is will assume power after the death of Khomeini. There is a lot of upheaval within Iran, as there are in most of those countries in that area. The same thing would be with Libya. There have been many, many attempts on Gaddafi's life by Muslim groups themselves inside the country who want to see true Islam established within the country, not the kind that Gaddafi was talking about. Similarly, within Iran, they want to see true Islam that would be more tolerant, that would allow, different religious faiths to practice, which is not the case within Iran. For example, 90% of the Muslims in the world today are not Shiite, they're Sunni Muslims. Iran is a Shia country, and in the constitution of Iran, the Sunnis are listed as another faith. I think there are other groups that would like to see a more tolerant Islam, and I would hope that the U.S. government back those more moderate groups.
Does the Islamic religion advocate violence or terrorism?
No. Usually when people ask that question, the word they have in the back of their mind is jihad, which is used in the media quite frequently today. And it's translated holy war, which is an unfortunate translation of the word. Literally, jihad means a struggle. And it can be many different kinds of struggle. Preeminently, it's the struggle of the individual to overcome selfishness and to strive for good and to submit his or her entire life to God. But there comes a time when social conditions are so bad that individuals' rights are deprived of them, and that is regardless of their faith, whether they're Jews or Christians or Muslims. And any time the social conditions are such that individual rights are deprived, then the Muslim is required to use force to correct the situation. But that force must be proportional to the end that is desired. And so also a principle of discrimination needs to be used, where we distinguish non-combatants from combatants. So typically in Islam, the women and the children and the old and the sick could not be targets. That's why terrorism is condemned by Islam, or hostage taken of the innocent individuals would be condemned by Islam. Once the a just system is established, then no more force can be used. You also cannot use force against any country that you have entered into a treaty relationship with. Even if you think that later on the terms of the treaty are not in your best interest, in Islam you're bound by the terms of the treaty.
In the past, especially during periods of war, minorities have suffered, such as the Germans in World War I and World War II, and the Japanese in World War II. Do members of Islam suffer during and following acts of terrorism in this country?
Actually, this year has been a very bad year for Muslims in that regard. We have had mosques bombed. Some Muslim women, of course, Muslim women are required to dress modestly and cover except for their face and hands, so that in many cities their head covering is torn off. I can give an example of just a 9-year-old girl who we were taking to a children's museum, and a 40 to 50-year-old man ripped off her headgear and said, "We don't want your kind in the United States." That's a common kind of occurrence. Just this year, one of the most important of the Muslim scholars in the United States, Ismail Faruqi, was stabbed to death in his home during our holy month of Ramadan with a Rambo knife. He was stabbed about 13 times, I believe. His wife was stabbed as she was cooking the meal. We have a breakfast before we begin our fast, and she was cooking, and she was stabbed to death at the stove. And then their daughter was also stabbed. The acts of violence against the Muslims, as I said, has increased, so that friends of mine I know who have their apartments bombed. Even in my own office this summer, in the premises, they've discovered a bomb. It's something that Muslims are learning to live with, but it's very frustrating for the Muslims from overseas when they read the Quran and it says about the Christians that they are the closest to the people, of all the people to them in love. And they come here thinking that they can live peacefully in a Christian country, and that they're the subjects of such kind of aggression.
Yet the Islamic religion allows Christians to live peaceably in their countries.
Exactly.
In fact, you tolerate all religions, do you not?
Right. In fact, there was a point in the history of Islam where one of the religious leaders, who was not a very good Muslim, decided that he wanted to join a mosque onto a church and sort of overcome the church, do away with the church. The Christians complained to the very next religious leader, and he ordered that the mosque be destroyed because the property of a non-Muslim within the Islamic State, is almost sacred. It's inviolate. They have freedom of worship. They're not required to follow Islamic personal law as regards to marriage, etc. In fact, at the time of the Prophet, even punishments for adultery, which were severe within Islam, were not meted out to the non-Muslims. In fact, it was required that they be judged according to their own book. If they were Jews, then according to the Torah, or whatever the law that the Christians had devised for themselves.
One final question concerning your Ball State topic, Islam and terrorism. Do you believe that terrorism is financed and supported from Moscow?
I don't have any kind of empirical evidence that that I could say that, though I have heard talk, and in my travels, many Muslims have the feeling that that would in fact be the case. And we know that in Iran, that Moscow has been very interested in the developments there. You know, for Iran's a strategic location. Similarly, within Pakistan, there were more than 400 invasions by the Soviets themselves along the borders, and the unrest within India and some places like that. We know of the involvement of the Soviet Union. And of course, they haven't been free from their own forms of terrorism in Afghanistan, when they plant bombs in the form of toys so that the children's arms and limbs are blown away, deliberately not to kill the kids, but to maim them so that they become a burden upon the community, and to demoralize the people. So they haven't been above terrorism themselves. I think the more important thing is how the U.S. will respond. For example, in the case of Libya, I was in the Middle East the week after the bombing in Libya, and it was unfortunate that we took almost an insignificant, pathetic little creature such as Gaddafi and made him a hero in the Middle East.
We're pleased to present Charles Kuhn, a concert pianist who is a professor of musical performance at Ball State University. He will play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. A new board game, Triple Quiz, has been developed by Dr. Harry Bell, Jr., Ball State University professor of secondary education. Well, Dr. Bell, tell us about the game. It looks very interesting, and being educational, too, it's going to work twofold. Is that true? Entertain and educate.
Hopefully it'll be fun for the people that play it. Originally, I intended it to be for students, and it's a game that takes facts and information that the students have studied in their textbooks and has put it into a game form. And when I first began to develop the idea, it was with the intent of reinforcing facts and concepts and ideas that students are studying, and hopefully it would get them to be willing to study those facts in a more enjoyable way.
When did the idea originate with you?
It originated really more than 2 years ago. First of all, I was playing with my daughter and son-in-law. I was playing a game down in Georgia with them, Trivial Pursuit, and it occurred to me that we could take the same concept, but instead of using just trivial information, use more important information. And then I played with my sister up in Connecticut, and I said, by golly, I'm just going to venture forth and take this idea and see if I could design a game board that would be fun for my methods students, and that I could take out into Muncie nearby schools and see if students, see how they would react to it.
Now, you did this very thing over the holidays, over Christmas, I believe.
That was over the Christmas holidays when I sat down and designed just on a piece of paper a little board the way I wanted it to be. And as you can see, if you look at the board, it's designed like a school. It has homerooms, it has a library in the center, and it has quizzes and a place for a final exam. So I was trying to make it a school-oriented type of a game board. And my next task was to figure out what subject area or what questions I would design. And I decided that because students at all levels study U.S. history and geography, and because we don't do an exceptional job in teaching geography, that I would concentrate all my questions on social studies type of questions.
For what age level?
This is for all age levels, beginning with 4th and 5th grade students, and it takes us all the way up through adults. In fact, we have on the board here 3 separate sets of cards, and the red set are questions that were taken out of elementary textbooks on U.S. history and geography. The white set of cards represent questions that I got out of 7th and 8th grade history and geography books, and the blue ones came out of high school textbooks on history and geography.
Give us an idea of how we play the game. You roll dice.
Well, yes, the first thing, you can play it, I could play against you, or we could have teams. You can have up to 4 teams. We have home rooms that we begin in. We have markers. I'm going to place these in the home rooms. And to begin the game, the team that can roll the highest number on the die would begin the game, and you start in your home room. Okay. And in this case, where you have rolled a 2, you can venture forth and move in any direction, but only one direction at a time. So in this case, you land on the blue, which is a fact and concept question.
So I choose a card?
No, you could play it that way, but the way I've designed the rules is the quizmaster, if there is one designed, would read the questions, or the opposing team or a member of the opposing team. So I'm the opposition here, so I would read a question to you, and if you were able to get it correct, then you continue as long as you get them right.
What is the first question?
You're going to have to wait for me to put my glasses on for that.
You can play with or without a quizmaster?
Yes. Some of the schools, I found there are students who really enjoy being the person that reads the questions, and that's fine. The first question for you is, Disneyland and Disney World are closest to the A, 30th parallel, B, 40th parallel, or C, 50th parallel.
Well, you have me. I'm just all at sea on that one.
Well, the right answer is the 30th parallel. You'll see in geography, we do look at latitudes and longitudes, and so that just happened to be a geography question. Sure. And now, if you had missed the question there, then it'd be my team's turn to roll. And as we move along, if you land exactly on one of the corners, for instance, if you made your way over to this corner here, this is a multiple choice quiz. And when you take that quiz question, if you get it right, you would get a white ring to place to indicate that you've passed that quiz.
I see.
Now, the word triple quiz came from the fact that you have to take a quiz on multiple choice, a quiz on facts and concepts, and a third quiz on true-false. And once you've passed all three quizzes, you've earned the right to come down and take the final examination. And if you should be the first team to pass the final exam, that team wins the game.
It's a wonderful concept. How long did it take you to develop? The idea came to you 2 years ago.
It came to me 2 years ago, and I wrote most of these questions. There are 1,800 questions. I didn't know how many questions would be right, but it turns out that I wrote 600 out of the 5th and 6th grade textbooks. What I would do, I would take 2 or 3 of the textbooks that have been adopted. Indiana, for instance, will adopt several history books, and the school corporation can select from amongst those books. So I would lay 2 or 3, and if I were studying the chapter on the Revolutionary War, I would read all 3 chapters, which incidentally there would be an awful lot of overlap, though some new information in one book that would not be in another. And then I would go back and I would write some questions on it, trying to get balance between the 3 categories. And then I continued this process until I had been through an entire set of elementary books, and then I did it with the junior high, and then I did it with the high school. I spent, over the past 2 years, some nights, 5 nights a week, sitting down for 2 or 3 hours doing this. So it really took me 2 years, and sometimes I would work 6 or 8 hours, and other times I might not work for a few days, but basically I have a lot of hours in it.
As you were developing it, did you run into, well, for example, designing the board, things that just didn't work?
I did, and I had a lot of help from students in Muncie and Delta Middle School, Burris. What I did, first of all, I just took a piece of board and I sketched out a board. It didn't originally look like this board. For instance, it didn't have any pictures on it. And when I played the game, so many students said, oh, well, a board's better if you have some pictures on it. Why don't you put some historical people on it? And, of course, you can see now that we have some of the boxes have pictures of famous people or places. Another thing that occurred, the students, I had some free rolls, several of them on the board where they would get a free chance, and they told me I had too many of those. They were landing on them too often. So now I only have 3 or 4 of those. So changes were made on the board by going to a class and actually playing it with the students.
Has a major distributor such as Parker Games or another manufacturer exhibited interest?
No, not at this point, but I'm hoping that because people are starting, this thing is starting to take off and people are buying it, much to my surprise, and I'm hoping that if I can develop a sales record here in the Midwest, that they would then be interested. They do not buy or get involved very much with outside games. They tend to have their own people that develop their own games. And you can't get this on the market for places like Target or Kmart until you have demonstrated that your game has a strong following. So I couldn't get that on to their shelves even if I wanted to.
Like getting a loan, you have to prove you don't need it before you can get it.
That's absolutely true.
Then, of course, if your business is successful and your game is very popular, then, of course, the companies are interested in buying.
Yes, and I wouldn't be surprised to see an interest develop over the next several months, or maybe it'll take me a year or two. But my first purpose in this game, of course, was just to have another method to motivate students. And I know from working with young people that they are intrigued by games and tournaments and competition and that sort of thing. Then I moved from that concept to saying, hey, this game, I think social studies teachers would really want to have it available, because all the students that played it, I could give them this board and sit back and you would see 8 or even 12 students on task for the entire 60 minutes.
Well, that's wonderful, and of course, when learning is fun, it's going to stay with the student, isn't it? Thank you very much,
Absolutely.
Dr. Bell. Dr. Harry Bell explaining his new game, Triple Quiz. Thank you for joining us.